In order to understand Marilyn and where she was at mentally the night she lost her life, we need to examine her childhood more closely. Marilyn's relationship with her mother and the lack of a relationship with her father are one of the factors that contributed to Marilyn's mental health struggles. According to her psychiatrist, Dr. Greenson, she always felt very lonely and unwanted and that she was never good enough, even when the world fell in love with her and showered her with attention. Marilyn's mother, Gladys Baker, was born Gladys Monroe on May 27, 1902 in Mexico, to her parents Della Mae Monroe and Otis Elmer Monroe. The family soon migrated to Los Angeles. There, Marilyn's mother remarried twice. First, she was married to John Newton Baker, with whom she had 2 children. After their divorce, Gladys won full custody of their children, but John kidnapped them. She couldn't do anything about it, and she didn't see her children until many years later. In 1924, she got remarried to her second husband, Norwegian immigrant Martin Mortensen, with whom she divorced after only a few months of marriage when she met her superior at RKO Pictures, Charles Stanley Gifford. He is believed to be Marilyn's father, though the identity remains uncertain. Marilyn Monroe was born Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1st, 1926 in Los Angeles, California. Gladys used her ex-husband's name Mortensen on Marilyn's birth certificate in order to hide the fact that she got pregnant out of wedlock. Marilyn was later given her mother's name and baptized Norma Jean Baker in an act of her grandmother Della to hide the illegitimacy. Sadly, Della died shortly after from a heart attack and she never got to know Marilyn. Della's husband and Marilyn's grandfather went missing a few years later, so he didn't get to know Marilyn as an adult either. Sadly, because of the uncertainty of the identity of Marilyn's father, she grew up without a father too. This left a big mark on her. Marilyn's mother lived undiagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and struggled to make ends meet at her low-paying job, so when Marilyn was just 2 weeks old, her mother Gladys left her in the foster home of evangelical Christian foster parents Ida and Wade Bellender in Hawthorne, California. This marked the first fracture in the troubled relationship between Marilyn and her mother. Despite being abandoned by her, Marilyn's time spent with Ida was the most stable of her life. Gladys was in and out of institutions, but she still visited her daughter. She even once came close to kidnapping Marilyn by locking her foster mom inside the home. Ida was able to break free and stop Marilyn's mother. In the summer of 1933, when Marilyn was 7 years old, her mother Gladys Baker bought a small house in Hollywood with a loan and moved Marilyn in with her. Unfortunately, just a year later, Gladys suffered a nervous breakdown and was institutionalized at the state hospital, where she was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Monroe was placed under the guardianship of her mother's friend Grace McKee, who also worked in the film industry. Marilyn's time with the McKee family was very troublesome. Her new foster family convinced a judge to grant Monroe a half-orphan status, which enabled them to place the minor with foster care families under their guardianship and still receive a government stipend. Marilyn moved roughly between 10 different foster homes and 1 orphanage between 1935 and 1942. She has stated that she was in some of these families. As heard in the voice of one of Marilyn's friends in the documentary The Mystery of Marilyn Monroe, Marilyn was essayed as a child and one of her was also McKee's husband. At the age of 16, Marilyn married a neighbor, 21-year-old James Dougherty, but the marriage fell apart due to Monroe's Hollywood ambitions. In 1946, just as Marilyn was finally free from her marriage and her modeling career was taking off, her mother was released from the state hospital and Gladys resumed living with her daughter at home of a family friend. Marilyn was on the verge of signing with the 20th Century Fox when her mother decided she wanted to move to Oregon to live with an aunt. She left for Oregon, but turns out she never made it there. Instead, she had gotten married to a man named John Ely. When Marilyn signed with the 20th Century Fox, she started using the stage name Marilyn Monroe, and as we know, Monroe is her mother's maiden name. She also dyed her hair platinum gold, which became her signature look. Her PR team wanted to erase Marilyn's past and instructed her to start saying that her parents died when she was just a young child, probably so no one would know her mother had a mental illness. During the 50s, mental health was a taboo topic. Mental illnesses were considered to be incurable, and mentally ill people were sent off to asylums and called lunatics. This could ruin Marilyn's career before it even started. So Marilyn agreed to lie and started telling people her mother was dead. But this lie came out when a journalist found out that her mother was actually alive and living at a facility and wrote an expose about her. In the late 40s, Marilyn had a string of forgettable roles but began her transformation into a Hollywood icon. She first met her makeup artist Whitney in 1946, and he became her only makeup artist until she died. They struck up a very close friendship. He explained that they spent hours creating Marilyn's iconic look, and he even created a special formula for her signature voluptuous lips. He used a few layers of different shades of red lipstick and layers of beeswax mixed with Vaseline. He had a few other special tricks for Marilyn's look, like cutting her false lashes in half and using a dark liner under her lower lashes to create the illusion that her upper lashes were very big and heavy. He even said in an interview that Marilyn made him promise that he would do her makeup if she ever died before him, and sadly, that is exactly what happened. In 1950, Marilyn landed a role in the thriller The Asphalt Jungle, which was her first notable role. The same year, she also drew attention for her work in All About Eve, starring Bette Davis. Her true breakout performance, however, came in 1953, the movie called Niagara, a thriller in which Monroe played an adulterous young wife who plots with her lover to kill her husband. From there, she starred in movies like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, How to Marry a Millionaire, and The 7-Year Itch. She quickly became an A-list actress and skyrocketed to fame. Despite her being one of the most famous actresses this time, she often said in interviews her dream was to be a real actress.
At the top isn't so important. What I'd like to do, that is what I would like to accomplish. I would like to be a good actress.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a matter of being on top, because I think some of the best actors and actresses perhaps aren't on the top. So that's not the thing.
Success has been or close to it, the dream of every American girl, all right, I guess. After you got what you want, did you want it?
Well, as I say, the thing I like the most is to become a real actress.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I was a kid, sitting in the front row at the movies on Saturday afternoon. And I would never come out of the movie. They'd have to come and get me, I'd sit in the front row. And I'd think how wonderful it would be to be an actress and so forth. But I didn't really realize about acting, except I appreciated what I saw. Bad, good, it didn't matter. I enjoyed it very much, everything that I would see, anything that would move on the screen. However, I think I realize more and more the responsibility, and it is a responsibility, and as I say, I would like to be a good actress.
Mm-hmm. Good night, Marilyn.
Bye-bye. It's a pleasure meeting you.
She wanted to play a serious character with more depth, but she was always given the same roles, those of a beautiful but not so bright blonde bombshell. And that is the way she was portrayed in the media. She was definitely the sex symbol of her time. Marilyn has shared in a few interviews that people often think she is not very intelligent because of her blonde hair, even though this is not even her true hair color.
You have a reputation as among the great mass of people. I think it's probably the most beautiful blonde in the world, but a kind of a dumb girl because you're a beautiful blonde. And blondes and dumbness seem to go together. I think it all started with maybe with Gentlemen Prefer Blondes.
It's interesting that people associate, if you happen to have blonde hair, naturally or not naturally, however, or if you're not out of shape in some way, you're absolutely dumb. You're considered dumb. I don't know why that is. I think it's a very limited view.
That isn't true, I'm sure.
Well, it doesn't matter what the person, what they look like, what color hair they have.
Nonsense.
Or if they happen not to be out of shape, I mean, my time's to come. Gravity catches up with all of us.
Yes. Slowly, but I'm afraid inexorably, if that's the right word.
Marilyn had a complicated relationship with her mother and a very traumatic childhood that was a result of her mother's mental health struggles, a fact that she abandoned her. But Marilyn still kept in touch with her mother and used her newfound money and success to take care of her. She always sent Gladys a monthly allowance and even tried to visit her a few times, but that always put a lot of stress and anxiety on Marilyn and proved to be too much for her current mental state. Marilyn had a lot of hardships in a tumultuous life, from never knowing her father to being S8 as a child and probably as an adult. It is no secret the toxicity of Hollywood and what many actresses had to do to get big roles.
In fact, one of the reasons my father, who was a theatrical agent, didn't want me to go into the business, didn't want me to become an actress, is because he warned me about bad men.
I mean, it must have sort of taken the edge off it in a way.
Well, I did. I was a little shocked hearing about Marilyn, because apparently Marilyn had been so abused by men and had done so many things to get roles that she hadn't wanted to do. And most of these men, Holly, were fat and old and ugly and hideous. You have to remember that when I came into the business in the mid-50s, these men had been in the business since they were young, in the 20s. So they were all old now.
What about the people around them? They must have been complicit. You tell a story, I think it was in New York, and you went to see a producer, and his secretary said, he's in there, and he was in the bath.
He was in the
She
bath.
must have known he was in the bath to send you in there.
Yes, yes.
A woman sent you in to him.
Yeah, well, he was there. There's a famous old bath thing, and he said, you know, the first thing he said was, come on in. And I said, no, I can't. I've got a date. And he said, who with? I said, my boyfriend, Warren Beatty. And he said, who's that? I said, well, he's a new actor. And he said, why are you bothering to go out with unknown actors? I said, I'm an important man. Come on, get in the bath. Come on, we'll talk about this role. You want to play this role? It was a great role. It had been done by Betty Davis, of human bondage. And I knew I was perfect for it because I was English. And I said, well, you know, I can't get in the bath. I mean, I'm busy, I have to go. And then he said, how old are you? And I said, 25. He said, 25? That's not young in this business anymore. When I first went up for a call, a sort of audition, just to play a maid, it was a Greek maid in a movie, and the director wanted me to pull down my top so that he could see my cleavage, and pull up my skirt so he could see my legs. And this was for a one-liner in a movie, which I did because it wasn't showing a lot, you know. And I thought it was a bit strange, but then you sort of forget about it, because at this time I was also doing photography, and the photographers would think nothing of touching you here, pinching your bottom, slapping you on the bottom, calling you sweetie, honey, tootsie, lovey, anything like that, treating you like a box of candy.
What about when you went to Hollywood? Because
Hollywood. Well, the first time that I had an experience was with two very, very famous megastars, and it was at a party, and I was very new in town, and I was 21, but I was still quite innocent, and I was wearing an off-the-shoulder top. And these two guys, I mean, they were so famous, I can't tell you who they are because your lawyer said I'm not to mention any names. Right. And I said, because I wanted to make conversation, oh, I don't really like this music. And one of them said, and I don't really like this. And he grabbed my top, which was elasticized, and pulled it like that. Oh, God. And the other one laughed at me, and I felt so humiliated. I just ran away. But that was just a social occasion.
Did you end up sitting down and talking to Marilyn Monroe about it?
Yes, that was, shortly after that I met Marilyn at a party at Gene Kelly's house, and I was playing in this role in The Girl in the Red Velvet Swing, and she said that she was considered, but she was too old. It was another one of those ageist things. And then she told me, she said, watch out for the wolves in Hollywood, honey. And I said, well, I've been in British films for 3 years. I can handle wolves. And she said, well, not the power bosses, honey. And she said, if they don't get what they want, they'll drop your contract. They've done it to lots of guys.
All of this probably played a role in why Marilyn battled with depression, substance and crippling anxiety. Many people who worked with Marilyn, including her publicist, have said that Marilyn was so anxious that she often was late hours for shooting or other important meetings. But those were not the only things that contributed to Marilyn's struggles with mental health. Marilyn often heard voices and she was very worried that she had inherited her mother's mental illness. According to the notes of her psychiatrist, Dr. Greenson, Marilyn did not have paranoid schizophrenia. However, she had tendency to paranoid reactions. Natasha Leites was Marilyn's acting coach at the time, and while working on the movie Asphalt Jungle, Marilyn asked her multiple times if she could hear voices coming outside of her dressing room, but there was no one there. Leites wrote to one of her students sharing her genuine concern for Marilyn and insinuated that Marilyn was heading down a dark road that would inevitably lead to her death if she did not acknowledge her mental health problems. Marilyn was married multiple times and her relationships could be a whole video in its own, but let's talk about her husband, Arthur Miller, an American playwright, essayist, and screenwriter. He was married when he met Marilyn, but he fell deeply in love with her. At first, he was reluctant to leave his wife, but eventually did and married Marilyn in 1956. Marilyn has always wanted to be a serious actress and imagined herself with a successful screenwriter like Miller. So, in the beginning they were really in love and happy, but that didn't last long. Marilyn's drinking and struggles with mental health really put a toll on their relationship. Right after Monroe and Miller got married, they flew to England so that Marilyn can feel the prince and the showgirl. During this time, she happened upon notes her husband had been making about her, and in those notes, Arthur wrote that he was disappointed by their marriage and sometimes found Marilyn embarrassing. This wasn't enough to end their marriage, but certainly put more stress on their relationship. For a time, Marilyn tried to live a quieter life and be a better homemaker, but that didn't last long, because she suffered a miscarriage in September 1956 and a second one in December 1958. She blamed herself and her alcohol use, which probably led to her becoming even more depressed. Miller and Monroe's relationship suffered again when in 1960, the actress had an affair with co-star East Montan while she was filming Let's Make Love, a movie co-written by her husband. Marilyn noted that Miller didn't fight for her or even object to the affair. Monroe and Miller's relationship reached its end point while they worked together on what would be her final finished film, The Misfits. Arthur Miller went through the second half of his life being constantly asked what it was like to be married to Marilyn Monroe. He wrote The Misfits while he was married to her, and the similarities between their relationship and the characters in the film are undeniable. Many suggest that the movie is actually about his relationship with Marilyn. The story is about a newly divorced woman who goes to Reno and meets a group of cowboys who fall for the character's beauty, radiance, and humanity. The cowboys compliment Monroe's character named Rosalind and court her throughout the movie, but none of the compliments make Rosalind happy. There is a sadness in her eyes, a void in her soul, something that can't be fixed with male companionship. Rosalind tries to fill the emptiness by going away with these cowboys, by drinking and having an affair with one of them, but none of that fixes her depression. The movie depicts what it is like to be in a relationship with an unhappy, fragile, and sometimes even erratic woman. While filming The Misfits, Marilyn was experiencing extreme episodes of depression and was battling substance abuse. She often showed up late for shooting and had trouble memorizing her lines because of her mental state and the fact that Miller was making a lot of last-minute changes to the script. She started disliking the movie, which only fueled her depression more. Initially, Miller wrote the movie for Marilyn so that she can portray a more serious role, as she had always wanted to do that. But with the deterioration of their relationship and the changes in the script, the tone of the movie changed too. Marilyn wrote in a letter, "Arthur said it's his movie. I don't think he even wants me in it. It's all over. We have to stay with each other because it would be bad for the film if we split up now." All of this and the harsh weather, because they were filming in Nevada and the temperatures were really high, that really worsened Marilyn's mental health and she started complaining of hearing voices again on set. Her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, prescribed her 3 times the maximum dose of Nembutal to treat her insomnia, and during the filming, Marilyn had to be hospitalized for a week in Los Angeles. Marilyn managed to come back and complete the movie, but by then her marriage to Miller was over and she filed for divorce. Reflecting on her relationship with Miller, Monroe admitted, "I wasn't sweet all through. He should love the monster too. Maybe I'm too demanding. Maybe there's no man who could put with all of me. I put Arthur through a lot, but he also put me through a lot." Marilyn entered Payne Whitney Hospital under the name Faye Miller. She thought the hospital stay was to rest outside of the spotlight, but was immediately taken to a psychiatric ward, threatened with a straitjacket, and placed in a cell. She was there for 3 days before her ex-husband Joe DiMaggio demanded that Marilyn was released. During her stay in the psychiatric ward, she wrote a 6-page letter to her psychiatrist, Dr. Greenson. "There was no empathy at Payne Whitney. It had a very bad effect on me. They put me in a cell, cement blocks and all, for very disturbed, depressed patients, except I felt I was in some kind of prison for a crime I hadn't committed. The inhumanity there I found archaic. Everything was under lock and key. The doors have windows so patients can be visible at all times. I picked up a lightweight chair and slammed it against the glass intentionally. It took a lot of banging to get even a small piece of glass, so I went over with the glass concealed in my hand and sat quietly on the bed waiting for them to come in. They did, and I said to them, if you're going to treat me like a nut, I'm gonna act like a nut." Now that we've covered some of the most important events that shaped Marilyn's character and influenced her state of mind, let's talk a little bit about her affair with John F. Kennedy. Thanks to Anthony Summers, who interviewed many of Marilyn's friends and people in her social group, we now have so much evidence about Marilyn's life, including tapes on which many people confirmed that Marilyn Monroe and JFK did have an affair. If you want to hear some of those tapes, I highly recommend watching the documentary The Mystery of Marilyn Monroe, although I will be explaining some of the tapes during this video. So, according to Marilyn's inner circle, her affair with JFK actually began in the 50s. At that time, he was the senator of Massachusetts and no one knew him in LA, so they got away with it, but people around Marilyn knew. Marilyn also became friends with Patricia Lawford, JFK's sister, and her husband Peter Lawford, JFK's brother-in-law. That is why Marilyn and John often rendezvoused at the Lawfords' beach house, where they threw lavish parties. A lot of people have said that the parties at the Lawfords were wild. Some even describe them as parties. One of these people is Dean Martin's wife, who also attended the parties with him. She said that the Kennedy brothers came from time to time to these gatherings. Just the things that were going on at this beach house. Peter was obviously pimping for both Kennedys. She said they often had sex with women while their wives were in the other room. They groped any woman they wanted to. That is how their father had raised them to be, and this was nothing unusual for them. Dean's wife, Jean, said that Marilyn, as an attendant of these parties, was involved with both brothers. After one of Lawford's parties in 1961, Marilyn's masseuse and close friend Ralph Roberts told one respected biographer, Donald Spoto, that he received a call from the actress asking him for massage techniques for muscles of the back, and that he heard a distinctive Boston accent in the background before Marilyn handed the phone to President Kennedy. During Marilyn's last months alive, she began the filming of what we know now as her last and unfinished movie, Something's Gotta Give. The events that transpired during the filming of the movie are a very important factor in Marilyn's mental state before she died, so let's get into it. The filming of the movie, which was supposed to begin in mid-April 1962, was delayed and Marilyn flew to New York to attend a fundraiser for John F. Kennedy instead. Sunday, April 22nd, the day before Something's Gotta Give had to start filming. Marilyn called screenwriter Walter Bernstein and told him that she was very sick and unable to start filming on Monday. The studio didn't believe her since Marilyn often called in sick on all of her other projects, or she was late with hours, so they sent one of their doctors to examine her. He confirmed that she was very ill, she had a high temperature, chronic sinusitis, and that she would need a couple of weeks to recover. On April 30th, only 1 week later, Marilyn went to set since they couldn't delay the movie anymore, but she still had not recovered and ended up collapsing on set and was taken home. She was recovering for 2 more weeks and then went back to filming on May 14th. Thursday, May 17th, Marilyn flew to New York for her planned appearance at JFK's 45th birthday celebration at Madison Square Garden. Because of all the production delays on Something's Gotta Give, the studio was not happy that Marilyn still chose to attend this event. Monday, May 21st, Marilyn returns to work on Something's Gotta Give. 3 days later, J. Edgar Hoover, a United States government official who served as director of the FBI, had a meeting with JFK. No one knows exactly what it was about, but following the meeting, JFK told the Oval Office to refuse all calls from Marilyn. The private line he'd given her was disconnected. Kennedy also called Judy Campbell Exner, another mistress, telling her that their relationship needed to end. JFK didn't tell Monroe himself. He convinced his brother-in-law Peter Lawford to break the news to her. Saturday, May 26th. According to Patricia Lawford, Peter called Marilyn and told her she'd never be able to contact JFK again and that she'll never be First Lady. Worried about Marilyn's reaction since she was very emotional and unstable at that time, Pat Newcomb, Marilyn's publicist and friend, but also a close friend of Bobby and John Kennedy, was sent to her house to spend the weekend. Monday, May 28th. Marilyn arrived on set extremely upset. One of her fellow actors, Tom Tryon, said of her that from the moment she came on set, she looked like a piece of fine crystal about to shatter. In the next couple of days, Marilyn worked with renewed focus and dedication, and on June 1st was Marilyn's birthday. She turned 36, and her co-workers gave her a small celebration on set. After filming, Monroe had an appearance at the Dodger Stadium for the Muscular Dystrophy Foundation. Because she was outside for several hours in the cold weather, she woke up sick again the next morning. Marilyn spent the weekend sick and depressed, trying to reach the president, but with no success, according to her friends. On June 4th, Marilyn was unable to return to work, and that was the last straw for the studio. Fox filed papers to dismiss Monroe from Something's Gotta Give and sued her for $1 million. They also launched a campaign against Marilyn in the media, calling her mentally ill and discussing her behavior on set. According to her psychiatrist, Dr. Greenson, Marilyn was very upset when she heard that she was fired, and he had to give her a tranquilizer shot to calm her down. Marilyn was 36, and during that time in Hollywood, she was considered to be aging, and she knew that soon she would not be able to get so many roles and be at the top of her career. She was very worried that her being fired and the smear campaign the studio had begun against her might put an end to her career. From June 20th till July 15th, Marilyn launched a massive media campaign on her own to combat Fox's negative press. She met with leading columnists, gave interviews non-stop, and completed many photo sessions with Cosmopolitan, Life, Red Book, and Vogue. She was determined to get her career back on track. Saturday, June 23rd, Bobby Kennedy flew to Los Angeles for a dinner party at Lawford's beach house. Marilyn also attended. According to Patricia Lawford, the purpose of Bobby's visits was to stop Marilyn from contacting the president. She had abandoned her codename and was openly trying to reach him. Sunday, June 24th, Bobby Kennedy visited Marilyn at her home at Fifth Helena in Brentwood. Her housekeeper, Miss Murray, has said Marilyn showed him around, but didn't seem too enthusiastic about the visit. Maybe Marilyn was upset because Bobby wanted her to stop contacting JFK. We don't know why was Robert at her house, but soon after the visit, Fox records show that Bobby Kennedy called Judge Rosenman, this is the chairman of Fox, telling him to ask Monroe to return to Something's Gotta Give. After that, Marilyn met with the Fox studio head and renegotiated her contract to Something's Gotta Give, and the movie was scheduled to begin filming later in July, and renegotiated deal was $500,000 for Something's Gotta Give plus a bonus if completed on time, and another $500,000 for a new musical called What a Way to Go. Things were starting to look up for Marilyn, and after this favor from Bobby, they seemed to be back on good terms. They both attended the Lawford 4th of July party and were seen walking, just the two of them, on the beach. In the documentary The Mystery of Marilyn Monroe, Summers, who is featured in the film as a narrator, spoke to Monroe's friends, co-workers, and even the private investigators hired to spy on her, and they all say with confidence that Robert Kennedy was having an affair with Marilyn Monroe. We already went through some of the people who confirmed their relations while talking about her affair with JFK, but another person to speak up was Dr. Greenson's daughter. Marilyn was meeting with her psychiatrist, Dr. Greenson, at his home, and she soon became friends with his wife and kids, and even attended dinner parties at their house. Joan Greenson said she and Marilyn spoke about love interest. She shared she had fallen for a boy that she had met in school, and Marilyn was always talking about a very important man she was infatuated with. Marilyn never shared his name because he was a very important person in politics, but she always called him the General. That is how insiders of the Justice Department were referring to Attorney General Robert Kennedy, and Joan knew it was either him or JFK Marilyn was talking about. Well, in 2016, more evidence was finally found proving Marilyn and Robert's affair. The actress left her acting coach, Lee Strasberg, some of her personal belongings. Among them, a letter was found that was sent by Jean Kennedy Smith, younger sister of Bobby Kennedy, to Monroe that read, "Understand that you and Bobby are the new item. We all think you should come with him when he comes back east." The letter was auctioned in California on November 17th as part of a trove to Monroe's personal belongings. J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, who was always trying to catch the Kennedys red-handed, was starting to wonder if the rumors about Bobby and Marilyn's affair had any truth to them. The FBI first started watching Marilyn while she was married to Arthur Miller because of her husband's political views, and continued to watch her after their divorce. They had found that Marilyn was leftist and that she was meeting with American communists in Mexico. In FBI documents, it is reported that she was sharing too much information she had heard from the Kennedys, and this was making the FBI nervous. All of this was happening during the Cold War, and Marilyn was considered a great political risk for the USA. Those communists she was talking to were talking to Castro's people, and probably that was the reason why Hoover had a meeting with Bobby on July 15th. Though their exact conversation is unknown, the following day Bobby cuts off all contact with Marilyn, just like John did after his meeting with Hoover. Telephone records show that Marilyn tried to call Bobby at least 8 times during the remaining of July, and also tried to reach him at home, which Patricia Lawford said infuriated him. And this leads us to the final week of Marilyn Monroe's life. July 28th and July 29th, 1962 was the last weekend of Monroe's life. Frank Sinatra invited Marilyn to fly up to his resort, the Kell Naval Lodge, to discuss their next picture together. What a way to go. Marilyn didn't want to go, but Frank convinced her. She later told Ralph Roberts, her masseuse, that it was a nightmare, a dreadful weekend. Also present were Mafia boss Sam Chiansana and Paul Skinny D'Amato, who later said, "There was more to what happened that weekend than anyone has told. It would have been the big fall for Bobby Kennedy, wouldn't it?" Several sources have confirmed that it was a dark and extremely disturbing weekend. Monroe was given pills, and photos of her were taken in compromising positions. Photographer Bobby Woodfield, the same one who shot Marilyn's infamous posing stills, later saw some of these photos while developing film for Frank Sinatra. He said that it appeared Sam Chiansana was having with Marilyn and that she did not look well in these photos. They were extremely disturbing pictures, obviously taken under coercion, and Woodfield advised Frank to burn them. Joe DiMaggio, one of Marilyn's ex-husbands and the love of her life, the one who got her out of Payne, Whitney, heard that Marilyn was at Kell Naval Lodge that weekend and tried to check up on Marilyn unsuccessfully. After what happened that weekend, DiMaggio never spoke to Sinatra again and refused him entrance to Marilyn's funeral. Joe DiMaggio always took care of Marilyn even after they divorced. He was maybe one of the only people who truly loved her and got her back. The reason Marilyn and DiMaggio's marriage didn't work out was because of Marilyn's Hollywood way of living. He believed that that was killing her and that the fake and corrupted people she was surrounded by, her drinking and her partying, were what was making her depressed and anxious. He tried to take her out of the city and have a peaceful life with her, but Marilyn was not done with her career and they soon parted ways so that she could film a new movie. And probably DiMaggio was right. Maybe the people she was surrounded by were the ones who contributed to her death. Joe not only hated Frank Sinatra, but he warned Marilyn about the Kennedys. After her death, he expressed multiple times that he thinks they were the ones who were responsible for her dying. The whole lot of Kennedys were lady killers, and they always got away with it. They'll be getting away with it 100 years from now. Monday, July 30th. Marilyn placed an 8-minute phone call to the Justice Department on the day she returned from the Kell Nava. In the following days, Marilyn started making plans about new movies and projects, and she spoke with Gene Kelly about a new musical. She had Something's Gotta Give to look forward to, and she made plans not only for her professional life, but her personal too. She planned to attend the opening of the musical Mr. President on the same night that JFK and Jackie would be attending. She ordered another spectacular 6,000 dress to be made, especially for her. So at this time, even if Marilyn was not at her best, she was making plans for the future and looking forward to continuing her career. So it seems unlikely that she was planning of ending her life. On August 2nd, Marilyn spent hours picking trees and plants for her new garden in the house she had bought not so long ago. The next day, the New York Journal featured a piece by columnist Dorothy Kilgallen that hinted Marilyn's involvement with a handsome gentleman who's an even bigger name than Joe DiMaggio in his heyday. Just 2 days prior, Kilgallen had called the Justice Department asking for Robert Kennedy to confirm rumors of their affair. She had received intel from a source close to the star. During that day, Marilyn tried to call Bobby several times, but he didn't answer. On the evening of the same day, Friday, August 3rd, Lawford and Newcomb took Marilyn out to dinner at La Scala in Beverly Hills, one of her favorite restaurants. Costume designer Billy Truvilla, who knew Marilyn, said that she appeared drugged or intoxicated that night, and she didn't even recognize him. When they returned home, Newcomb and Monroe allegedly got into an argument, and she tried to reach Bobby Kennedy again. And all of this leads us to Marilyn Monroe's last day alive, August 4th, 1962, at her home on Fifth Helena Drive in Brentwood, California. Marilyn's friend and fellow starlet Jean Carmen says Marilyn called her at 6 a.m. that morning to tell her about disturbing phone calls she'd received during the night from an unknown caller. A woman's voice allegedly told her to leave Bobby alone and called her a tramp. Carmen says Marilyn sounded nervous and exhausted. Marilyn requested that Jean come over to talk about things she couldn't discuss on the phone. But it was Jean's birthday that day, and she couldn't see Marilyn until Sunday. Eunice Murray, Marilyn's housekeeper, recalls Marilyn walking into the kitchen around 9 a.m., wrapped in a bath towel. She looked sick, she was pale, and looked tired. 10 a.m. Playboy photographer Larry Schiller stopped by Fifth Helena to discuss a potential photo shoot with Marilyn. When he walked up the driveway, he recalled seeing Marilyn kneeling outside her guest cottage, picking flowers. They briefly discussed the shoot, but Marilyn wasn't sure she wanted to further her reputation as a object. They tabled that discussion until Monday. At 12 p.m., Miss Murray recalls that Pat Newcomb, Marilyn's publicist, had stayed the night at Marilyn's and woke up around noon. Upon entering the kitchen and finding Marilyn, the two had another argument. Miss Murray later said that the cause of the argument was Newcomb's loyalty to the Kennedys versus Marilyn, and this disagreement became very heated. On Fox's studio lot, a helicopter touched down shortly after 11 a.m. Studio publicist Frank Neal was working that day and was surprised to see Bobby Kennedy emerge from the helicopter, then disappeared into a waiting limousine. Neal also caught a glimpse of Peter Lawford. The arrival of Bobby Kennedy in Los Angeles was further corroborated by former LAPD Police Chief Daryl Gates. All of this information is also confirmed by Harry Hall, an FBI informant. Miss Murray stated that Robert Kennedy arrived at Fifth Helena with Peter Lawford sometime between 3 and 4 p.m. This testimony is also corroborated by Marilyn's hairstylist and famous stylist to the stars, Sidney Gillaroff. In a 1995 interview, he stated that he spoke to Marilyn twice on the day of her death. She was in an absolute state, he said. When he finally calmed her down, she said, "Bobby Kennedy was here and he threatened me, screamed at me, pushed me around." Between 4:30 and 5 p.m., Miss Murray found Marilyn in a hysterical state. Miss Murray called Dr. Greenson, who arrived at Marilyn's house around 5 p.m., and he attended to her in her bedroom while Miss Murray and Pat Newcomb stayed in the living room. Around 7 p.m., Dr. Greenson left Marilyn's, telling her to take some Nembutal and to get a good night's rest. Between 7 and 9:30 p.m., Marilyn took her phone in her room and made several phone calls. She was a well-known lover of making late-night phone calls all throughout her life, so this was nothing unusual. Around 7:30 p.m., Peter Lawford's dinner guests, Joe and Dolores Nair, remember Peter taking a call from Marilyn. Around the same time, Joe DiMaggio Jr. called and spoke with Marilyn for about 15 minutes. He said that they had a lively conversation about his new girlfriend and that Marilyn seemed quite normal and in good spirits. Between 8 and 8:30 p.m., Sidney Gillaroff, Marilyn's hairstylist, spoke with her. He said she was feeling much better and had met with her psychiatrist, Dr. Greenson. From all these witnesses, we can clearly see that Marilyn was finally feeling better, but just an hour later, she would be found dead. So what happened in this hour that led Marilyn to take a lethal dose of Nembutal, whether it was on purpose or just to calm her nerves? An answer to this question can give us Fred Otash, one of Los Angeles' most famous private investigators and an ex-cop. He was hired by Hoffa to bug Marilyn's home in the Lover's Beach house where the Kennedys and Monroe often met in order to develop a derogatory profile on Jack and Bobby Kennedy and their relationship with Marilyn Monroe. Robert Kennedy was really against the mob and was trying to take them down, so they hired Otash to help them fight against Bobby. He had tapes of her and JFK and of her and Bobby having intimate relations and of what occurred in her home on August 4th, the day she died. According to Otash, that day between 9:30 and 10 p.m., Bobby Kennedy called Marilyn from the Lawford's house. Otash could hear Marilyn and Bobby quarreling violently over the phone. She told him how she felt, like she was used by him and John and passed around like a piece of meat. She told him to never contact her again. Around 10:30 p.m., Peter Lawford received an alarming call from Marilyn where she lapsed into unconsciousness during the call. Extremely worried, Lawford called several people to check up on her. When he was unable to reach Dr. Ralph Greenson, her psychiatrist, Lawford called Monroe's lawyer, Milton A. Rudin, who in turn reached out to Monroe's housekeeper, who told him that Monroe was fine. In some interviews, Miss Murray has said that she became worried about Marilyn around 12 a.m. when she noticed that the light in Marilyn's room was still on and decided to check up on her. After finding out that Marilyn was dead, she called Dr. Greenson and Dr. Engelberg, not the police or ambulance. In other interviews, Miss Murray has said that all of this went down at 3:30 a.m. There is conflicting testimony from Miss Murray about whether she found Marilyn dead at 12 or 3:30 a.m., but either way, the police were notified of this tragedy until after Marilyn Monroe's psychiatrist Dr. Ralph Greenson and physician Dr. Hyman Engelberg had visited her home.
The curtains back, I saw Marilyn lying on the bed, nude, and I was just alarmed.
I asked them very pointedly why it took from midnight, approximately midnight or 12:30 till about 4:30 to call the police. I'm standing looking at two doctors, both of whom know that this is what we call a coroner's case. They know they have to notify the police, and it takes them 4 hours to get around to it.
Mrs. Murray now says she can't remember why she didn't call Dr. Greenson until 3:30.
That I don't know. I'll have to admit, I don't know.
85.
So what happened in the missing 4 hours?
By this time, it was widely rumoured that she was having an affair with Kennedy's brother Bobby, the United States Attorney General, whom she'd met through Peter Lawford, the actor, and Kennedy's brother-in-law. And certainly Kennedy was in the habit of visiting her in California.
He came to the house one day, and I opened the door for him, and Marilyn was out in the garden. He went out there, and then he stayed about a half an hour or so and left. And she came to me immediately, and she said, "Isn't he nice?" He said, "Say thank you to the lovely lady who opened the door."
Do you think she was very much in love with him?
I think that she appreciated having him as one of her admirers, but I don't know more than that. I couldn't, as a layman, couldn't describe her as depressed, but I know she had many worries, and this particular day she was not lively and enthusiastic. She was very quiet.
Was she in the mood of a person who would later deliberately take her own life?
I doubt that very much. And she had told me that one of the very first things to warn me that if she takes sedation, which she did every night, sometimes she's apt to forget and would take a second dose too soon. And this is what she had to be very careful about. So that was the first thing that I was concerned about after she died, that probably had happened when she went to the telephone.
The Los Angeles Police Department was called around 4:25 a.m., almost an hour and a half from when Monroe was supposedly found unresponsive by her housekeeper, and more than 6 hours after her death. Her time of death was somewhere around 10 p.m., and we know that from her autopsy and the state of her rigor mortis. During that time, Eunice Murray, Dr. Greenson, and Dr. Engelberg were alone at the scene, and when the police arrived, Marilyn's room had been tidied up except for an empty bottle of Nembutal and a cup on her nightstand. The police have said that the scene felt like it was staged. Sergeant Jack Clemens of the Los Angeles Police Department was the first officer to arrive on the scene of Marilyn Monroe's passing. Later, in his own writings of the event, he recalled that Monroe's housekeeper Eunice Murray was running the washing machine when he arrived. He also noted that Murray was acting strangely and was evasive when questioned. Sergeant Robert E. Byron, who arrived on the scene a few minutes after Clemens, also noted in his report that Murray was acting like an unreliable witness. Definitely something suspicious happened that night between 10 p.m. when Marilyn died and 4:25 a.m. when the police were called. Thanks to Anthony Summers' investigation, we now know what really went down in those 6 hours. Summers spoke to Natalie, Arthur Jacobs' widow, the man who ran Marilyn's public relations. Natalie told him that the evening of August 4th, she and her husband were at the Hollywood Bowl listening to the concert. I will never forget that night because we were at the Hollywood Bowl and someone, I don't know who it was, called us, and all I remember is that we were no longer at the concert, if you know what I mean. It was about 10:30. So we now know that Arthur Jacobs was informed about Marilyn's overdose at 10:30, and he left his wife and went to Marilyn's house. This coincides with Marilyn's time of death, according to the pathologist who worked on her autopsy. Jacobs' widow also shared that he fudged everything off and that was his business to keep the media at bay. All of these claims are corroborated by a member of Arthur Jacobs' staff who confirmed that Jacobs told her that he went to Monroe's house at 11 o'clock at night. Next, Summers spoke to a former ambulance driver who had spoken to the DA. The name of this man is Ken Hunter. In his interview with Summers, he described the scene and how he found Marilyn's body. Summers also spoke with Walt Schaefer, the founder of Schaefer's Ambulance. He confirmed that one of his ambulances was called at Marilyn's house and they took her to Santa Monica's emergency room. According to him, they found Marilyn alive but comatose. 7 other people from his staff confirmed this story, as well as Dr. Greenson's son and a journalist who spoke to Dr. Greenson in 1964, 2 years after Marilyn's death. Unfortunately, Marilyn died in the ambulance on her way to the hospital. So what happened after Marilyn died? Jim Doyle, a senior FBI agent, has said that the FBI was all over Marilyn's house even before anyone knew what had happened. They removed all of the books from Marilyn's house and any pictures or evidence in her house that could connect Marilyn to the Kennedys and the fact that they had an affair with her. The reason that they did all of this was because of an order that came from a higher up, which would mean either from the Attorney General or the President. Harry Hall, an FBI informant, has also confirmed that the FBI was in Marilyn's house, but not to investigate, but rather to hush-hush the whole situation. If you want to hear the tapes where he speaks about all of this, you should definitely watch the documentary. So, if all of this is true, and I think that it is because of how many people can confirm all of these events, this would explain why Marilyn's time of death is around 10 to 11 p.m., but the police were not called until 4:25 a.m. This would also explain why her death scene looks staged and why Miss Murray kept changing her story. After Marilyn's death, the world was shocked. Every reporter was trying to get details about the story, and one of these reporters actually came close to uncovering the truth. He spoke to a helicopter pilot who gave his log to the reporter, and in it, he could see that Bobby Kennedy flew to San Francisco around 2-3 in the morning. The pilot also confirmed verbally that it was in fact Bobby Kennedy. The reporter then called Kennedy's people to confirm the story, but the answer he got was that Bobby would appreciate if he didn't run the story. In the years following Marilyn's death, many reporters have come out with articles trying to pin Robert Kennedy to Marilyn's death, and a lot of people still believe to this day that he had something to do with her passing. A lot of conspiracy theories started gaining traction in the 70s, and people have not stopped talking about the suspicious circumstances surrounding Marilyn's death. And you know what they say, where there is smoke, there is fire. I personally don't believe that Bobby Kennedy killed Marilyn, but he and his family definitely pushed her to the state she was in when she decided to take a lethal dose of Nembutal. She was very upset from her argument with Bobby. She had felt very lonely her whole life, and now being rejected from the Kennedys even more so. After Marilyn Monroe's passing, Joe DiMaggio was left devastated. He arranged her funeral as a very private ceremony, with most of her prominent Hollywood friends excluded. People like Frank Sinatra and Peter Lawford were deliberately not invited. Her funeral took place on August 8 at the Westwood Memorial Park. She was laid to rest in a crypt at the Corridor of Memories. Marilyn was buried in a green Emilio Pucci dress, and her longtime makeup artist and close friend Whitney Snyder did her makeup for the last time. Things that don't make sense about Marilyn's death. The housekeeper's timeline changed frequently. Eunice Murray initially told Sergeant Jack Clemens that she phoned Dr. Ralph Greenson around midnight. She later said she first phoned him at 3 a.m. Peter Lawford, who persisted in trying to check up on Marilyn Monroe after their earlier conversation, claimed he had been told that she died around midnight. Her attorney also said he'd been told she died around midnight by Dr. Greenson himself, but the police were not called until 4:25 a.m., almost 4 hours later. Marilyn went from happy to dying in less than a few hours. As we remember, multiple people who spoke on the phone with Marilyn hours before she died have said that she sounded happy. She also didn't sound like she was saying goodbye or anything like that. So to think that between these calls, Marilyn would just decide to end her life without something disturbing happening makes no sense. Dr. Greenson did not believe she died from suicide. No one in Marilyn's life believed she ended her own life. Some interesting things were found during her autopsy. According to Dr. Noguchi, a fresh bruise was on Monroe's hip. When he examined her stomach, he found no traces of the dye that coated the Nembutal capsules that claimed her life, and chlorohydrate was also found in her blood, which was not prescribed by her doctors, and Marilyn could not have obtained that legally. Marilyn was an addict and took Nembutal for years, which means that she metabolized Nembutal faster than a normal person would. And this could explain why no traces of these pills were found in her stomach. Chloral hydrate is a sedative used for insomnia, and Marilyn did suffer from insomnia, so it is possible that she bought this drug illegally and used to treat her condition. Dr. Noguchi later admitted that he should have tested her internal organs instead of just performing toxicology tests on her blood and liver. I am sure that this could have cleared up a lot of the subsequent controversy, but I didn't follow through as I should have. The former coroner also said he had saved specimens of the contents of the star's stomach and intestines and tissue samples from other organs, but before he had a chance to study them, the specimens were no longer available. The samples had been disposed of. This is very suspicious. At the end, we still don't know how Marilyn Monroe died. Was it a suicide or an accidental overdose? Or was it murder?